Good afternoon again, and welcome back, Realty Pros, to another week of Porterhouse Realty Talks. We are excited. I'm glad that everybody has had a great Easter, some time off to get some rest, refreshment, enjoy your families. We are continuing our conversation today. In part, I wanted to mention one thing very quickly that we've been talking about for many weeks now in Boomtown. You guys will have an update in your dashboard for training. Anybody that has requested that you have those fundamentals in an on-demand format so that you don't have to attend the live training, they have been added to your Boomtown dashboard. So you will be able to go in and simply look at those videos instead of having to participate in the daytime trainings if your schedule does not allow. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of that. This evening for training, it's going to be virtual only. Mr. Cooper is going to be doing our training this evening. So he's going to be sharing everything that you guys need to know from the purchaser side of the market as it pertains to financing, the programs, and, rates and everything that you guys need to look out for so as to be able to advise your buyers accordingly. That's just a couple of housekeeping things. All right, guys. So as we discussed earlier on, we're going to talk about the market, the local market. What are you guys seeing with your listings? What obstacles have you been able to overcome on the listing side, on the purchase side? And I've already spoken with Curtis. I wanted to have you to share some of the challenges maybe that you faced on the listing side and how you've overcome those. And then we'll move on from there.
Yeah, so I've recently had a listing that actually was on paper and with my clients was a very smooth transaction, a pretty easy listing. We listed, March? We came under contract within about 4 days. The property went on the market. Phenomenal looking, lovely home, great neighborhood. Listed it properly and received multiple offers on the property. And so everything for the most part was somewhat smooth sailing. I did my due diligence in the beginning to make sure, I had everything set with my listing documents and whatnot, photos, all kind of our standard things. And we accepted an offer, obviously. And that particular offer, very strong, conventional financing. They had a really strong earnest money deposit, well over the 3%. I vetted the lender, everything was great. And on top of it, the buying agent also let me know that the buyers were also willing, to pay for all tax and recordation. And that was a huge thing for my particular sellers. So that definitely stood out in the pile of offers that we did have. And needless to say, we accepted the offer. So when the offer came over, I looked everything over, and sure enough, they were willing to, the buyers initialed the paying for full tax and recordation transfer. So what had happened is basically certain little flags started firing off. So and it was really geared toward the agent. They had signed off that we were going to use Velocity Title. And so I immediately, once we were ratified, I'm on it. I know that the buying side, should be sending the ratified contract, but they can have 2 copies. So I'm going to send them an email as well. So I sent over the ratified contract so Velocity could start working on it. And then literally like the next day, the agent called and was like, hey, we wanted to use a different title company. And I was like, okay, you know what I mean? I was like, all right. I let Velocity know what was happening. But what really happened was a few days later, I was speaking to the lender. So the lender actually called me and kind of was introducing herself, that she was taking the file over and was going to be working on the file going to closing, and pointed out that the buyers are paying for the recordation tax and recordation transfer. And I was like, yeah, literally I got off the phone with her and the agent called, and she was extremely upset, and that they weren't paying for the recordation, that there was an error. She also proceeded to email basically everybody involved in the transaction. So the lender, the title company and whatnot that they're working with, that there was an error and that everything will just go back to the way that it normally is. It's normally a 50-50 split, and that's what it needs to be. I then responded and let everybody involved in the transaction know that there has been no changes to the ratified contract at hand, that the contract that we have in place is the contract that we will be moving forward with, and nothing has changed. There's nothing been signed. And basically there became a back and forthing of no, it needs to change. And I spoke to the agent. The agent was becoming a little, how can I say, irate or very upset at what has happened, telling me that her assistant made the mistake, that it shouldn't have happened. And so really with all of this, kind of me just being understanding, I was like, well, let me ask, my clients, like I'll let them know what happened and, see what they say. They immediately were like, nope, that's what we agreed to. That's what we want. And that's what we're going to move forward with. So I represent my clients and I let her know, hey, the contract terms are what they are. And that's what it is. So some time, this is like some time is going by and there seems to be no real understanding on her part of what happened, like what's really going on. And some of the dialoguing with emailing became a little unprofessional in a way, at least for me. And I like to think of myself as a very laid back Zen kind of guy, but I can also cut you. like I can be slick, and I had to really kind of refrain myself and take the high road and be more professional. And so I actually, at that point, I've personally called the lender involved and the title, the person working on the file, just to kind of talk to them and let them know, like, hey, things are just getting a little, I'm not going to keep going back and forth. The contract is what the contract is, just kind of just more introducing and letting them know kind of how I am, how I operate. And needless to say, there was still this like resistance to what's happening. Now everything is still moving along with the transaction though. And that was the one thing that, Jasmine really pointed out to me, that, as long as everything is still moving forward. So there were no inspection contingencies. There's no real contingencies with the deal. The loan kept moving forward. So, with that, I knew the buyers wanted the property. The problem is that this agent was more than likely going to take a hit, or, however that's going to work out on their side for this error, really that she did. So it kind of getting closer to closing got to a point where I just, speaking to my clients, they were prepared to, if they had to terminate the contract, or, they were, if they had to relist it, they were going to relist it. They were not budging from them paying the full tax or recordation. So I really had to put it out there once again to the agent and to kind of all the parties involved, that this is where we stand, this is what's happening, and this is how we're going to proceed and move forward, just so everybody's clear as we're getting closer to closing. And needless to say, things kind of balanced on out. The appraisal happened. I didn't hear anything about the appraisal, which was good news. I did reach out to the listing, or the lender, and wanted to know for sure if we were going to be closing at the offered price, which was about 20,000. I think it was 20,000 over our list price, and everything was moving along. And needless to say, My clients went in yesterday. We went to closing. We will actually settle tomorrow. But they signed. The first thing I looked for at the Alta statement was tax and recordation, which was all on the buyer side, which was great. And my clients were extremely happy with the outcome. And that's all, I'm happy that my clients are happy. And the tone also is drastically changed on the other side of the transaction because, I had another call with her, prior to closing. And it's just very interesting because it's, sometimes I guess we'll look at, for me, I was like, did I do something wrong? Did I actually mess something up? And am I missing something? And, I kept looking at the contract and, Jasmine looked at the contract and it was just really like, no, I didn't, I did exactly what I knew I was doing. I handled myself accordingly. And just kind of, I guess, moving forward, if anybody does have any issues with, I guess, someone that's a little bit more irate on the other side, is to kind of just, somewhat dig your heels in and, close the deal and just kind of keep everything moving forward to settlement. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're after. My client was happy. My client wanted what my client wanted. I ensured and made that happen. And from that, I'm hoping, I get referrals, which I'm sure I will from this particular transaction. So it'll close tomorrow at 1:00 is the buyers will go in. But just an interesting, I've that was the first time I dealt with anybody kind of, nasty. If that makes sense on the other side. But yeah, happy to close. Tomorrow is the day, and looking forward to this one.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Curtis. I wanted Curtis to share because there's several different layers of elements that I wanted to pull out for us to talk about today. The first thing you heard him talking about were the terms of the contract, right? The agent had their buyer to sign off on a contract with terms that the buyer didn't agree to. The buyer was not aware of, and the agent was not aware of those terms. Now, that being said, that contract, once it's fully ratified, that is a fully binding contract. So that is a warning for us as buyers, agents, and representatives. Make sure that whatever the terms are in your contract, your buyer sees and agrees to those terms. Unlike what this agent did, they simply sent over the offer to their assistant, let their assistant prepare it, and let their assistant get the buyer to sign it. And that's a no-no. Your assistant can prepare an offer, but you've got to review the offer. You've got to confirm, and you've got to send it over to your client in order for your client to sign off it. You cannot have an unlicensed person to do so and, just leave without having that foresight. That being said, once the contract is fully ratified, that's a legal binding contract. So although that agent's assistant made a mistake and the buyer didn't mean to, offer to pay all the transfer and recordation terms, as Curtis said, with multiple offers in a competitive market, that was the piece that caused the seller to accept their offer. The overpriced offer with the buyer willing to pay all the transfer and recordation terms. So I wanted to commend Curtis because we've talked a few times about this. And when he said, he's a laid back Zen kind of guy, that's why I said, Curtis, do not allow any other agent to pull you out of your professional realm. She may be getting unprofessional and doing all these things, but that's not who we are. That's not the way that we carry ourselves as Porterhouse agents. You want to be beyond reproach. So just make sure that you're handling it in the utmost professional manner possible. If she's unprofessional, you continue to be professional and you document it. You simply send over everything per the contract. So I wanted to give Curtis kudos because you didn't have to go in and cut or anything. He didn't. He resisted. He withheld. And I was a witness to that. And definitely we want to make sure, guys, that whatever we're sending out is going to represent us well if it ever has to come back. If anybody else has to read it, you want to make sure that what you're sending to somebody is going to look well for you, your client that you're representing, yourself as a professional, and then your brokerage as well. So that was one aspect. Another aspect of that is the agent attempting to, aggressively push Curtis and the sellers to change the terms of the contract, like without any representation from the buyer or the seller agreeing to do so in the contract, simply thinking that, if for lack of a better word, bullying Curtis and trying to bully the seller to make them change the terms of the contract. You guys know that's not how we operate as in industry. You literally can't do that contractually. That's called under duress. You can't force somebody to, agree to or disagree to terms in a contract. It can be avoidable contract because you're putting the person under duress. So she may or may not know those things, but like I told Curtis, the agreements between the buyer and the seller, as long as the buyer is continuing to move forward and doing everything necessary to make sure that they close that loan, and the seller is doing the same, you keep moving forward, okay? So one of the benefits in this transaction was that the buyer had a substantial earnest money deposit. And that earnest money deposit, I think it was $20,000. Is that correct, Curtis?
Yeah, it was $20,000.
Perfect. So when we talk about terms of negotiations in a buyer's contract, and you're looking at those from the perspective of the listing agent and you're helping your seller, that's a big deal. Because if this buyer may have had a $500 or $1,000 earnest money deposit, it would have been very likely that this buyer could have caused a real big mess. They could have, pulled out of the contract, had the seller to start over, and all those inconveniences our client would have had to face. But because this buyer had the wherewithal to offer $20,000 above list price to, be approved at that price, have the liquidity to offer a $20,000 earnest money deposit, the conversation with Curtis is this buyer is savvier than to do something to cause them to forfeit $20,000. They're going to close. So you just stay the course. You focus on settlement. No matter what that agent is doing, stay the course. This buyer is going to close. Okay. So that's another consideration when we're looking at offers with respect to the earnest money deposit. It shows you how serious and how interested in the property that buyer is. So always remember that from the listing perspective, because your primary goal from the listing perspective is to protect your client's interest. And all of those are factors that help, of course, to net them the most on their bottom line, and then also to secure that contract. So like he was talking about, contingencies were being removed and the buyer was moving forward. The appraisal went well, no inspection contingency. That's how you want to manage that type of contract. And when it comes to another agent that's just being, as Curtis said, for lack of a better word, nasty on the other end, do not respond in kind. If that agent is being nasty, you respond in a professional, polite manner. State whatever the terms of the contract are and continue to move forward. And I just wanted to just commend you for reaching out to the lender and to the title company as well, who may have been privy to the tone of the emails that that agent was sending, so that you could quench everything and then allow them to get to know you as a courteous professional. So I wanted to commend you in that regard.
Thank you.
What are your guys' thoughts and questions about this transaction, or maybe another element to this transaction? Maybe you've seen or heard something like this before. Maybe you're facing something like this now, or maybe you just want to be prepared in the future. What are your thoughts and what are your questions? All right, so then I have DSC and Kerman, you unmuted yourselves at the same time. Go ahead.
Ladies first. Go ahead.
Come on, you can go this time.
Okay. Well, I just had a quick question, and my question was there ever a time during this whole transaction, Curtis, that either the buyer reached out to you, went past their agent because maybe they felt like, okay, their agent dropped the ball because they made the mistake was done on that end? Did they ever reach out to you in regards to that? And number two, Mrs. Porter, if that agent had done that, from my understanding, we wouldn't be able to talk to the buyer anyway. Is that correct?
So the second part, yes, that's correct. So if the other agent's buyer or seller ever reaches out to you, you want to courteously and politely ask them to reach out to their real estate professional. As a professional courtesy, we do not advise other people's clients.
Yeah, and the buyers didn't reach out to me at all. But I think one of the interesting things was when I spoke to the lender, once we were ratified, literally like the next day, and that she was looking at the contract and was like, oh, I see that they're paying for the full, tax and recordation. And I was like, yeah. And she was even like, well, I figured that's why their offer got accepted. So that was one of the things too, like kind of dealing with the agent, was she would keep telling me, trying to like force this, like, that's not how we do it. That we do a 50-50 split, which I was like constantly having to tell her, like, no, that's not how we do it. We can do it that way. Yes. So I was like, but I personally have had a buyer that has paid for all tax and recordation to get our offer accepted. So it's not uncommon that this happens, yeah, she was just, yeah.
Well, Ms. Porter, my question, I guess, too, is because this was a mistake on the agent's part, is that grounds for the buyer? Could the buyer have said, well, you made this mistake, I just want to get a new agent, or is that grounds to do something like that?
That buyer could have taken whatever provisions they needed to, if they felt like they were misrepresented, if they felt like that, error was too costly on them. That would have been between the buyer and their buyer's agent. That would have had nothing to do with our client, our seller client, or, our listing agent or our brokerage. So yes, that buyer could have very well have taken up that financial loss with the agent and with their brokerage. They could have asked that the broker signed it. The buyer could have done any of those things, because if the buyer truly was unaware and unwilling to pay those expenses, then chances are it could have likely come out of the agent's commission, because that was that agent's
Okay.
error.
Right.
So on part of Porterhouse and Curtis, he did exactly what you guys will need to do. You represent your client's best interest. And just like Curtis was saying, and I'll add a tad bit more language to it, it's not what we do, it's what's agreed to between the buyer and the seller, period. So we're always facilitating between the buyer and the seller. If the buyer offers and the seller accepts, then those are the terms of the contract per their agreement. So we are never to assume anything that has not been agreed to in the contract, nor can we. There can be no outside arrangements or outside agreements that have not been represented in writing, signed by all parties in the contract. And for the agent to try to represent something as such, her broker may not have been aware of all the things that she was doing in that contract.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
Great question, Kermon. Dee, you were next, and then Darlene, you have your hand raised.
So I just wanted to say, for those of you who might have a little less grit than Curtis, remember that we have an excellent broker who will always have your back on things like this. So make sure when things like this start happening that she's aware, because that's where you get your support from. I'm telling you, it can be pretty crazy at times. And there are those out there who will try to bully you into doing something you're not supposed to do. So either put on your big girl or big boy pants like Curtis did, or call on your broker and have her push you to put on your big boy or big girl pants, because we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do by the contract, and no one is supposed to be able to take us in a different direction.
I got
Very
the
well
grit.
stated.
I got the grit. I was about to let her have the grit. That was the problem. I was over here biting my, like, oh wait, who do you think you're talking to?
That's right. Only let the professional aspect come out.
Right.
Sometimes you may have to state something firmly, but you want to be professional. Excellent.
Curtis,
That
as
was
you
very
said,
well stated.
with blood coming out the side of your lip, right?
Because he was biting his tongue. And sometimes it's like that, but you bite your tongue and you represent your client, because remember, at the end of the day, it's your client that you're representing. So whatever you send is observed as and is to be on behalf of your client. So kudos, and very well stated, Dee. Darlene, go ahead.
So my question is, I have a question, and the question is, so with this woman being so difficult, could Curtis have like just maybe asked to, talk to her broker to get somebody else to be like a mediator. So, you know, he could have said, you know, she's making the atmosphere tense or something like that. Could he have gone to her broker and, you know, went that way to maybe calm her
yes,
down?
yes, he could have definitely gone to a broker, and anytime an agent is doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, anybody can go to their broker. One of the things that's of the consideration is what is the quickest path forward, and that's a straight line, right? So if the goal is to get to settlement, then it may take us a little bit off course to kind of go through the broker and have somebody reassigned and do all of those things. That's one of those considerations that you have to make with regards to your client's best interest. So, you know, it may make the atmosphere easier for you to work in, but if that agent isn't maybe, you know, forcing their client to release the contract or something like that, it may be a better fit to just continue to stay focused on settlement, because sometimes you're going to have to work with people that are contentious, and you got to be able to manage as a professional in the midst of that and still get to your expected end.
But you know, what's crazy, Darlene, about the situation, right, is that at one point I needed to call the agent. And so I just pulled up the email, because, you know, at the bottom of the email, we have the foot where, you know, our information is. So I called the number, left a message, and then the number calls me back. So it was the agent's manager. And she was like, well, how did you get my phone number? And I was like, it's on the tag for the agent I'm working with. She was like, well, that's my cell phone number. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, I just called the cell phone. But then I'm on the phone with the manager, right? And she's like, oh, she must have just copied and pasted my thing, right? So it was just funny, or just like, you know, God works in mysterious ways. So now I'm on the phone with the manager, and then I'm actually like running down the whole scenario of like what's really been going on within this file. You know, and she clearly was unaware, or she might have, I think she was aware of what was the problem or this thing happening, but she wouldn't have, I don't know what the other agent was saying about me, because in these emails, she was starting to really question my professionalism, how I'm not professional. It was all of, and that's when I was like, let me go this other route. I don't need to entertain this. And me speaking with the manager, we had a great conversation. You know, and she totally understood where everything was coming from. And she, you know, she was like, she messed up, or, you know, this is what happened.
Yeah,
and then
I trust her assistant, but you got to trust and then verify.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing, and even with the deal, like the contract is the contract now. I mean, I just can't change it. You know, and then I tried to recruit the manager, but you know, yeah, on the phone with you, you know, how do you like it over there? Because we do stellar job over here at Porterhouse. But it was just funny how, you know, because you mentioned going to, and just how that just miraculous, you know, I called, left a message, and was on the phone with the manager. It just showed the unprofessionalism, you know, just kind of the unprofessionalism just kind of kept coming through with this particular agent, and that kind of gave me even more grit, or more, I know I am in the right, I know what I'm doing, and I'm just going to keep, you know, just keep nudging this thing right on forward. The buyers clearly wanted the home. Who
Good
cares?
for you. I'm glad in the end it's going to work out.
It worked out.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me from what you're saying that not that it's either here nor there, but that the agent was relatively new and was making, you know,
I think so. I don't know
kind
for
of
sure.
new mistakes.
Well, she was making like, I mean,
Which,
when she messed up, when she caught the mistake, she literally emailed everybody, title, the lender, everybody involved in the transaction, to just change it, to switch it back to how it's normally done.
which is something that somebody new might do, or somebody who doesn't have the kind of experience that you have might do. You know, they may have been agent for years, but
I don't know.
when you don't do a transaction, few and far between, sometimes you forget that there's things that you're not supposed to do. So it sounds like they were just really just messing up and then not wanting to take the responsibility for doing the mess up. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, D, and I would think that it wasn't a new person, because would a new person have an assistant? I just think that the person probably was just too busy and she had to deflect and blame somebody.
She ain't have no assistant. She ain't have no assistant.
Yeah, she probably made the mistake herself, and she wanted to bully
Yeah, no
Curtis and call him
assistant.
unprofessional and make him. Now let me put a spin on this, and let me ask you guys this, because this is great dialogue. What if Curtis had taken that pressure and the bullying from the other agent and the accusations of being unprofessional because, the clients are expecting, their buyers to pay all the transfer and recordation, and he knows it's supposed to be half, and this is what we do in the industry, and, all of these accusations and pressure. What if Curtis had folded and had convinced his seller clients to do that? Would that have been in the seller's best interest? Tell me from the perspective of our fiduciary being to our clients that care, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accounting, confidentiality. Would that have been a benefit or a detriment to our clients?
Definitely a
Absolute
detriment.
detriment. Absolute detriment.
Absolutely, absolutely. So why am I asking that? No matter what the pressure is coming from the other agent, whether they are, deflecting, projecting onto you, telling you you're not professional because you won't fold and overturn terms of a fully ratified sales contract and all these things, you stand your ground. You do what you need to do and you get to settlement for your client. Whatever those terms are that your clients agree to, if you have to walk through with a barrier on so that all of the, the negativity and the accusations don't even faze you, do what you need to do and get through to settlement for your client. Because just like you said, Curtis, your client's going to be sending you referrals and they're going to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Curtis, I probably had a phone call when you were in the beginning, but did you say that you questioned them not doing the 50-50 and that you asked if this was correct or something? Did you ask about that, or you just read it and you was like, okay, good?
Well, no, the interesting thing was that was a selling point that she told me. And for me, because I had a buyer that we did that exact thing. And so that really stood out to me. Like I kind of like latched on to that, like, oh, wow. And the price point of the property, that's a good chunk of money. You know what I mean? Like and you're willing to do that. And I know that I dialogued that with her, like, oh, that's that's wonderful. And then the contract comes over and it's initialed exactly where it needs to be. Cause that's, I'm going through looking to see. She did write though cause there's the three, either the seller pays for it all, the buyer pays for it all, or there's the third one, the 50-50, the other. And then there's that line where we can type in information. So in that line, she did type Maryland and tax. She wrote something in there, right? But the initial was in the middle, that the buyer's going to pay for it all. And so looking back at it and they initialed obviously in the wrong spot. But just language and the cleanness of the offer, it should have said not Maryland tax 50-50 split. Boom. That would have given me cause to kind of call her and been like, hey, I thought you guys were paying for, it's initialed. I thought you were paying for the whole thing. But
so she made two mistakes. She didn't even put the appropriate language. If it's a split, just like you said, it should say 50-50 split.
Yeah. And it didn't. It said, and
nothing
so that's
ambiguous.
Trying to like hang on to, like, well, I wrote Maryland. I was like, you told me on the phone they're paying for it all. You initialed with it where they're paying for it all. I don't know why we're talking, or like, what's the, where did we miss things? Like you just messed up, and the lender, I guess when I spoke to the lender afterwards, like as the dialogue was heating and everything, the lender was interesting because she was very like, I'm out of it. Like, well, she was like right away kind of letting me know that it's between you and the buying agent. And I was like, oh, I totally understand that. I just wanted to speak to you so that I could have conversation with you. So basically what I was doing with literally speaking to the lender and the title company, was I wanted to just talk to you. I don't operate like this. From my understanding, everything is moving right along forward. My sellers are happy. They're packing. How's the loan coming? Is everything good, looking good on your end? And so even I think if I would have folded, it would have just been a nasty screaming match between the two agents. But title and lender, they're still going to try to get the deal essentially closed. It just would have been ugly, and I'm just not gonna, but I was able to feel out, or now that lender knows my temperament, heard me on the phone versus an email. You know what I mean? Like, cause you could even see my picture, but now we had a conversation, like, hey, I'm not going back and forth. On our side, everything's great. We're happy with the contract, and we just want to move things right on forward. And let that note also with the title, who ended up being a really great asset. We were there were some things that came up with my sellers that they needed to clear in order for the title to convey and all of that. So there was some work that my sellers had to do, but everything, actually at closing, she made sure to come out, introduce herself, and shook hands. It was a great transaction. Nice to work with you. Where when she understood in the beginning who the buying agent was, they were even like, oh, this person has a bad temperament. And so that too just gave me I'm good. You know what I mean? Because I'm not nasty. I'm not going to come off nasty. And if this is kind of how she works, then people already know this is how you work, and you just got caught. You just slipped up, and go ahead and eat that.
One thing you said I wanted to highlight really quickly, because when the offer goes over to the lender and the title company's responsibility is to uphold the terms of that contract. So whatever that language is that's in there, the title company is going to be processing it as thus. The same thing with the lender. That underwriter is going to be underwriting the terms of the contract and everything that's in there. So if there were truly a problem that would have impacted the buyer's financing, the lender would have been the first person to respond to that, because the lender is looking at that to say, okay, well, is the buyer able to qualify based on the terms of this offer? So that is one point that, just right offhand, there's really no problem from the buyer's financing aspect. It's just that the agent made a mistake. So that the last part of this conversation is, what did you learn from that, Curtis, to make you, even, I would say, let's see, how should I phrase this? To make you even better suited to manage these type of transactions in the future and to even better represent your sellers. What did you learn? What is a key takeaway?
I'd say interesting. One of the key takeaways from this experience was actually working with buyers, really seeing from the other side of the sloppiness, or how once the contract's ratified, the scope of, you're kind of in it, so I really learned probably more from making sure that when I do submit an offer for a buyer, that all my ducks are in a row, like everything, is where it should be, what it should be. I didn't just haphazardly have somebody initial here or sign this here, which, as being a porterhouse agent, I wouldn't have anyway. But I think really that was probably one of the biggest things I took away, was the cleanliness. And I always try to pride myself on, when I submit an offer, it's very organized, it's very clean. So I'd say that was probably the biggest. And then the other thing is just, knowing that when we're in the right, we're right. And there's a legally binding contract that's really backing us up. And there's nothing that I really had to prove. I didn't have to justify myself or justify the position. The contract is the contract. It is what it is. And I'm just adhering to what everybody's agreed upon. So it kind of just more empowered me, not that I was second guessing myself, but just empowered me of hey, if it is what it is. Here, and I even told her, one of the last conversations, I was like, for me as the listing agent, I was under contract in 4 days. I was like, if this thing implodes and I have to go back on the market, I'm gonna find a buyer. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm good. Do your clients really want this house? Well, you need to figure it out and work this out, because this is the deal. I have nothing to do. I'm sorry that this is where we're at right now, but I represent my clients and it is what it is, you know, like, because I'll get it ratified again. If it had to go that, if it got really to that point and that it just totally unraveled, the property is a beautiful house. I was like, you know, it's a beautiful house. I have no problems. Do you want to close it? Are you want your clients to be happy? Mine will be.
Excellent takeaways. What about you guys? What are your thoughts and takeaways from the conversation today?
Mine would be basically pretty much what Curtis said. It is what it is. It's the price is the price. The contract is the contract, and we both agreed and we signed off on it. And you know, that's just like your holy thing. You know, I wouldn't move. I wouldn't move. That helps you. That's your piece of confidence right there.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
This is Angela. I was just gonna say, it's funny how, Curtis gave things from, the perspective as a listing agent, and then you kind of recap based on what we learned is, just being, to better represent your buyer. But I would say on both sides, just to really, thoroughly, check your contracts. We place those initials somewhere. We send them over to our client. They sign them. And then just remembering to review those documents, where those signatures are before you submit those over to, the listing agent. I just think that that's kind of my takeaway, just to make sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's, because we're protecting our clients with this, maybe one of the biggest investments of their life. So it's important.
Excellent takeaways.
Yeah, and Mrs. Porter, I just want to piggyback on everything everyone else has said, and I'm so glad this came up. I'm sorry you had to kind of go through this, Curtis, but I'm glad it came up because it really helps crystallize my thinking in regards to us protecting our client. And, in another business I used to be in, we used to always say, documentation beats conversation any day. And in this is signed documentation, of course. But, it's very important that people honor contracts. And that's something that people have tried to get away from in our society. But contracts carry weight, and the consequences of signed contracts carry weight. And so I think that's something that people really need to understand. And then the other thing that we used to always say is failure to prepare or to be professional on your part does not now constitute an emergency on my part. It's not, an emergency on Curtis's part that you did, that all these things happen. I'm sorry they happened, but you did it, so you fix it. My father used to always say, you made your bed, now, you have to lie in it or get the wrinkles out or do whatever you have to do. So I just think I'm glad that you stood firm. I'm glad that you were professional. And Curtis, you gave a great name, great reputation to the Porterhouse family. So we kudos to you, my friend. But we would expect nothing less of you. So kudos again. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I would just want to say real quick too, it's like, even if it's the professionalism, so if the agent acted differently, kind of acted in a different tone out of the gate of messing up, who's not to even say that my sellers might have even had a little, like, say, sympathy, but it was the immediate tone of like coming at, like, just very unprofessional out the gate. And that reflected, where who's not to say that, because my sellers were aware of just the nastiness, because it was just so uncalled for. And then dealing with this, the way what I was dealing with, my sellers are like, they're friends. They're like, wait, she's saying what about you? And it was like, oh, we ain't changing nothing. So like, all right, because again, if my sellers would have been, okay, you know what, we'll do a 50-50 split. I would have agreed. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. But it was probably, it just kind of reflects to just like take the high road, always be professional, you know, always do right by people. You know what I mean? Like, even if you messed up, you know, she could have handled it a very different way. And, you know, because now if I ever see that name come across and there's multiple offers, what, you know what I mean?
You're not accepting that one.
But you
No.
can't say that. It has to
I
be the
didn't- I
offer
didn't-
that's in the seller's best interest.
I didn't say, I just said if
I have a question on that. Excuse me, Curtis, because I'm hearing you, but I'm thinking about what you say. So if you're having those kinds of conversations or communications with somebody who's being unprofessional, is that something that you relay to your seller or to your buyer, to your client? You relay that kind of
well, you know, it was the way that everything was happening. So I'm letting my client know what's happening within the transaction.
I understand that, but I'm saying, if you're being professional and above board, are you telling your client that the agent is acting in an unprofessional manner?
Yeah, she's being very forceful. She's upset with the 50-50 split not happening. It's not in the contract. So I was letting them know, you know, I think what we're doing now is we're getting like the overall synopsis of the whole thing. But
Right.
as the transaction is going, I'm letting them know what's happening within the transaction. And then
I have a
we're not-
question about that, because I was going through a situation
So
like that.
hold
Go
on
ahead.
real quick, D. I wanna respond to that. So to both of your credit, there are some things in the transaction that as the professional, you want to shield your client from, right? Because you want to make sure that they keep their head on their shoulders and they're focused on getting to settlement. And there are going to be things that sometimes, you know, the agent will do and say that may make the seller's head pop off, and you may not relay it in that way, right? There are going to be ways that you will couch that information and share it with your client so as to keep them focused on getting to settlement. All right. So
Okay.
let's just remember it from that perspective. You don't want to share everything that's going on because you're there in order to mitigate that. Some things you could share from the perspective of what's going on with the other agent could make your client flee and just kind of run the other way. So be there, be that, you know, the mediator in the middle, be the buffer as need be, and then the information that would impact the transaction itself. That's the information that you're going to share with them. Okay. Now, that being said, you also want to make sure that we, as real estate professionals, you can't defame another real estate professional. And that's even if they are being very unprofessional, if they're doing all of these things as a part of our ethics, we can't defame another real estate professional and say anything to a client that could impact their business. So from the perspective of receiving an offer, you have multiple offers on the table. One is from an agent that you know is very unprofessional. You can say, okay, well, no, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, don't accept their offer. They're extremely unprofessional. That's not something that we can do.
But if you,
and you don't know who they know. So you want to allow the merits of the offer to speak for themselves and the seller to accept the offer that works best for them.
but if you, there's always the possibility that is just a one-off. But when you're talking about working in the best interests of your client, if you know that if you've had more than one transaction with this agent and things often go awry, would that not be something that would not be in the best you know, be the best thing for your client?
So that is one of those topics that goes along the lines of ethics, because what's in the best interest of your client is the buyer. The client is not signing a contract with the agent. The buyer and the seller are agreeing to terms to a contract that we as the real estate professionals are facilitating. So there should be no unprofessionalism from a real estate agent that's going to affect the client's best interest, because then that means that we're not performing our fiduciary to the client. Okay, So as a real estate agent, you can talk to the other real estate agent if you need to talk to the other real estate agent's broker, but we can't do something that would impact the transaction in and of itself. And the buyer is agreeing to work with the seller is accepting an offer from the buyer based on the strengths and the merits of that buyer's offer, not based on the buyer's agent who's submitting that offer.
Yeah, I mean, that offer that did come in was a phenomenal offer. You know, like, it was a great offer. It was a strong offer. I vetted it. It was a great offer. You know, so there was no real problem with the offer itself. It was just the sloppiness of paperwork on the agent side that just just jammed her side up. And I would work with her again. Like, the offer was great. High offer, 20 over lit. I mean, everything was lined right up, you know? So, I mean, and even with me telling my clients, it was more of, we're good. We're going to get this, we're closing. So, you know, like I was saying, we're just getting now like the water cooler talk of the deal. But as I'm moving through the transaction, I'm letting my sellers know we're straight. Rest assured, everything's moving right along, and we're going to close the deal out.
Well, I have a question, Jazz.
Sure.
So in relation to the question that Dee had in terms of, okay, so you have a listing and you've worked with this agent, let's say twice before, and each time it's been, whatever. Is it possible? So like, say she presents a very good offer and her work ethics and you're considering taking her offer, could you kind of go through it and maybe could it be some things that you kind of like ask about before accepting the offer to try to see if you could, kind of determine as to whether or not you're going to avoid the contention? You know what I'm saying?
So these are very human questions that we're asking when it comes to, the rapport that you want to establish between agents. That's why it's important for us when we are in a transaction to befriend the other agent. From the perspective of the board, however, that has no merit because we do not accept offers and we do not submit offers. A seller accepts an offer and the buyer submits an offer. And the seller has to accept the offer that is acceptable to them from whoever the buyer is, irregardless as to who the agent is.
What Jasmine just said is very important, guys, and as tempting as it is to talk about an agent who is thick-headed or not really professional or don't really know what they're doing and all of those good things. It's very important to remember that you are the professional and that in many instances, guys, whether you want to realize it or not, you're going to have to lead the transaction. And I always take leadership of the transaction, whether I'm on the buyer or seller side. Once I'm ratified as a buyer's agent, I'm going to take over. And I'm going to make sure that that transaction is pushed through. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to take charge. I'm going to lead that transaction. The same thing on the listing. As a porterhouse agent, we want you to take charge of the entire transaction and make sure that it gets to closure. Remember, that's one of our core values, just close it. We want to make sure that it gets to close. But what we don't do, what we can't do, what you don't want to run into is any type of ethics issue whereby you're going to be accused of saying something about a real estate professional. Again, Jasmine said, you never know who you're talking to about that person, one. And two, it really kind of makes you look bad if you think about it, to be talking about another professional in the course of your work. It's better to go ahead and allow that person's lack of knowledge work in the benefit of your buyer or seller. It's better to, as Curtis did, to be stalwart and to refer to the terms of the contract. It's better to make sure that once you start to see that the verbal conversation has gone off the rail, just to start to then text, email, and that way you can document all of the conversations that are happening going forward. It's better sometimes to not even engage in the conversation over the phone with an agent once you realize that the agent either has made a mistake, they don't know what they're doing, or they're trying to bully you. It's better to just refer to the contract and keep everything in writing, and to continue to push the contract and the terms of the contract. And many of you who've been in situations like that, work with me directly, you know that's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to say stop the conversation, don't get emotionally involved, and refer to the terms of the contract. Submit things on the document, on the board documents, back and forth. Allow them to respond. They have to respond. The buyers make a request of the seller. The seller has to respond on the board document. They can either negate it, they can scratch through it, they can not initial it, they can do anything, but it has to be responded to via the document. So it's very tempting, but it's a very, very bad idea. It's going to get you in trouble if you do it.
Very well stated, Mr.
Yeah.
Porter. This was a great conversation today, guys. Thank you for sharing that transaction, Curtis. I felt like that was very valuable for us to dissect as a group, because you see there are many elements that we may become very passionate about, or have our feelings to be excited because of things that are kind of outside of our control. What is in our realm of control is the way that we respond and how we manage and carry ourselves as real estate professionals to represent our clients, to represent ourselves, to represent Porterhouse, and then the industry as well. So you carry a lot on your shoulders. Do what you need to do as Porterhouse agents to make us all proud. When one of us wins, all of us wins. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording for today, and then I have some information I want to share with you guys. But tonight's training will be virtual. It's going to be virtual as opposed to hybrid. So Mr. Cooper is going to be training tonight, and that will be virtual. Let me go ahead and end the recording now.